Hello and welcome to Fire Headlines, where we discuss the hottest topics in fire service news. I'm your host, Samantha Didion, and joining me on the panel is Chief Kehmna. Our focus for this episode is on the evolving role of robotics in firefighting. An article in the Daily Dispatch shares the story of the Tulsa Fire Department using multiple drones to monitor a large chemical fire at a petroleum tank farm. Ken, I want to start by asking you, when you were fire chief, what type of technology did you have at your department, and how does that compare to the technology in the fire service today?
Oh wow. Drones are probably probably the single best example of a technology that's fundamentally changed, kind of so many things, and not just our industry. Drones were sort of in their infancy as I was getting into the later time, later portion of my career. One of the things I noticed in the article was that had to be some special permission to use the drone, right? And I can remember, I think it was the Kincaid, might not have been the Kincaid fire. I cannot remember. Oh, it was a fire in Yosemite National Park, or just outside Yosemite National Park. And they wanted to use drones, but at the time, the size of the drone that they wanted to use to actually do, pull in some perimeter information, they actually had to have special permission from the military because that aircraft was so tightly controlled at that time. It was military developed technology that had, found its way into fire service, like a lot of things do. But it was sort of the signal that things are going to be very different from this point forward, just that technology alone. So we were starting to move with just fire apparatus. We're starting to move away from, the old, knobs and dials and things that you would actually turn. You'd actually be using computers to, monitor pressure and set your pressures on your pump panel. We were utilizing technology inside of our breathing apparatus to give us thermal imaging so we could do more effective search and rescue. All of those things were, just becoming like the next great thing toward the latter part of my career. And now they're just, we're seeing it grow exponentially. Absolutely thrilled to see drone technology specifically. I think I'm really thrilled to see that, just gaining in popularity and gaining use, because I think it offers quite a bit.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the benefits that comes to departments when they utilize drones. The article highlights that they're able to monitor the situation from a safe distance, and firefighter safety is at the front of mind. What are some other benefits that can come to departments by utilizing these kinds of robotics?
I mean, I think the safety, not having to put people in harm's way to try and gather that information, even from above, is that it sells itself on that. But when you think about the other kinds of things that you can do with it, you can cover a tremendous amount of ground much more quickly with a drone than you could even with a conventional aircraft. Simply because you got flight time and you got fuel and you have all the other stuff, but drones fly at a lower level. They can cover, they can cover a ton of ground. You get immediate information and feedback from it. It's wonderful from that perspective. Plus, in order to deploy one, whether it's a tethered drone, which I don't know if you know that we do have what's called tethered drones. A lot of fire apparatus manufacturers, when you go to the shows, in fact, I encourage you the next time you're at, whether you're at one of the, fire rescue, or, Fire Rescue International, one of the other ones, go see the apparatus displays. I guarantee you one of them will have a tethered drone, which is deployable right off the top of a vehicle. So it's tethered, so it can't disappear. Basically, on a tether, it goes up to a certain height and then just gives you an operational picture from above, which is totally unique. You don't have to put somebody on a ladder, and you can get a really good picture of it. But you can gather a bunch of other information as well. You can have remote sensing, you can do fire perimeters, and you can pull in all kinds of other information with these. And they're deployable relatively quickly by single individuals. Set it up, fly the thing, and gather the information and bring it back to the incident command post. And it takes, one or two individuals to do what would arguably take a substantial amount of commitment of personnel and equipment to gather that intelligence any other way. It really is kind of one of these limitless possibility things. Imagine it's not a fire or something like that. Imagine you have a silver alert because you've lost an elderly resident in someplace and it's out at night. drone technology, married with thermal imaging cameras gives you the ability to cover a lot of area where somebody might be missing and gives you the opportunity to find somebody where it would be very, very difficult to cover that same ground with human bodies. So it really, I mean, the technology is really quite limitless.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the tethered drone, and then apparatus displays. I do actually remember seeing a tethered drone at the FRI conference that was in Dallas back in August,
Yep.
and that definitely was something cool. I think they had it tethered to a rig that was set up. So I do actually know what you're talking about there. On the flip side, why would a department possibly veer away from using this technology? Would it be, operations, the cost of it? What are some of your thoughts on that?
I think that probably one of the biggest things keeping agencies from embracing the technology is just the ability to deploy it. Because it does take away from if you don't have a large staff or somebody who you can add to an incident to deploy and fly the drone or manage the drone, then you have to take that from somewhere else. So a lot of smaller agencies simply don't have the staffing to be able to deploy the drone effectively. And then it has to be transported, it has to be set up, it has to be flown. The way a lot of agencies do it is they have partnerships with other agencies that do have the capacity, whether it's through their local law enforcement agency. Search and rescue teams are really good opportunities for these kinds of things. So I think that probably the easiest way to do it is for a lot of agencies to consider partnering with somebody else who already has one. Because if you have an existing program, you have somebody who's trained, you have somebody who has, because you have to be licensed through the FAA. You don't just go, you don't just go down to the hobby store and buy a drone. You have to be,
Yeah. Do you know
trained
how
in.
long it takes to become certified, if that's the correct terminology, to fly a drone?
I would love to say I do, but what I recall from the conversation that I was having with somebody who was putting a program together for the department that I worked for, it depends on the size and the capacity of the drone, what level your training has to be, if I remember correctly.
Oh, interesting.
But I don't. But it stands to reason, because they really are limitless in terms of where they can go and how high they can go and or how far they can go, and they could be a danger. So obviously proper licensing and training is going to be important like anything else. In both departments that I've had the pleasure to work with, our drone capabilities came from other agencies. It came from law enforcement agencies who had the capacity so that they could deploy it. They could put that drone up, and they would work with us at the incident command post, giving us the information that we were needing from the drone.
Okay. So now implementing the use of drones, like we were talking about at the beginning, how does the capability change? Yes, it's keeping firefighters a safe distance to monitor, but and then you also mentioned the thermal technology that some drones have. What are some other ways that it changes from an incident command post? Yeah, how does it change the dynamic of that?
Oftentimes, when we respond to an incident, whether it's a vegetation fire or a structure fire, there are many unknowns, right? We have obviously we don't necessarily know when we arrive exactly where the fire is or exactly where the fire is going. We don't have the 360-degree picture. So we arrive, and to the best of our abilities, we gather that information by doing a walk around a structure, trying to get as much information as we can before we start, making decisions and tactical and strategic decisions. Incorporating a drone into that not only gives you the ability to have a much bigger picture, it gives you the ability to maintain that picture over the entire incident. It's just ongoing and active information that could be feeding an incident commander at the incident command post with something they're hearing on the radio, that something's going on the C or the D side of the structure. Now they could actually see what's going on the C side or the D side of the structure. So it just adds one more piece of information to ensure that incident commanders have as much information as they can to make good decisions. So it's incredibly valuable just from that perspective alone. The fact that it's you know that it's constant, it doesn't, you don't have to have a person attached to it necessarily. I mean, not the drone, but somebody has to fly it. It makes it a much more usable technology because it's not a one and done. It's up, it's hovering, gathering information that you can continue to use as you see fit, and they can very easily be redeployed to get you a better picture, if that's what you're looking for, of a part of your incident that you might not be able to see.
Expanding this conversation a little bit further past just drones, what are some other robotic kind of technology, which also why it's on the front of my mind? I encourage our listeners to check out the Western Fire Chief Association's wildfire articles that are published because I do believe there's one coming up talking about robotics in firefighting. So that's a cool little tip for our listeners to go check out. But what are some other robotics that you've been exposed to during your time in the fire service?
In my time in Santa Clara County, I was on the UASI Approval Authority, and I can't tell you how many, but I can tell you that we purchased a number of robots and enhanced the capability of those robots over the time that we owned them. Through the Homeland Security program, it was essential for us to have the technology, specifically post 9/11. Robots were used quite a bit to do, bomb detection. They would go and they could take samples. They could actually pick up a device and put it into a container if necessary. We were able to do remote monitoring with them, put them into a hazardous environment where you couldn't put a human being for a prolonged period of time to do atmospheric monitoring and those kinds of things, even take samples and bring them back. We did all of that while I was with County Fire, and it fantastic capability that is when you see what robots are doing today. I mean, you think about the kinds of things that we were doing 20 years ago with, tracks and wheels and sort of working to the incident to see what the Boston Analytics robots are doing now it's mind-boggling to think of where that will go and where robotics will actually be able to take that same kind of equipment, whether you're doing, active firefighting or you're just doing samples or you're doing monitoring or something like that. It's fascinating to see where that is actually going to go.
Firefighting robots, what comes to mind for me is like the Mars rover. Is that an accurate kind of description of what these robots are, or do they just vary across the board depending on their capabilities?
It would be hard to even say it's a less sophisticated robot. That seems kind of an oxymoron, doesn't it? But
But
when
it's
you
not like a human, it doesn't look like a human being per se, like we see in the movies.
it does not look like, was it the housekeeper on the Jetsons, Rosie, the robot? Is that what that, if I remember correctly? You're way too young to even know.
I was thinking of the Will Smith movie when, the robots go bad, actually.
Yeah. No, I mean, oftentimes they're deployed out of the back of a sport utility vehicle or a back of a van. They ramp down, if they're ramped down because they're very, very heavy. The batteries and everything on them is very, very heavy. Where the Mars rover is going to move, it has to move very, very slowly over crazy and comical terrain, but they're very, very different. These are much more they stand 3, 4, 5 feet tall. And that's they're much, much larger. They move fairly quickly for a track driven or wheel driven robot.
You attend a lot of conferences that have exhibits talking about these kinds of things, just like the FRI conference that we mentioned. How do you see this technology growing and getting integrated into departments as, like, say, in the next 10 years, just from what you're hearing at these conferences?
I saw one 2 weeks ago that I thought was absolutely amazing. And I want to say the company, I can't, might be Burnbot, I think. Essentially, what they have is it's a small masticator. Think of it as a very aggressive lawnmower. And basically, you can deploy these into an environment where you need to cut fire line, or you need to, cut a shaded fuel break or something like that. And these machines, with somebody walking along remotely operating, you don't have to be right next to it, walking along while this thing basically just chunks away and creates fire line next to somebody much faster than you would be able to do through conventional means, certainly by hand, even mechanized. The other advantage, as I understood it, is they're very quiet. They're incredibly quiet. So the advantage to something there, as opposed to having, a big giant bulldozer and chainsaws and all the other stuff making a lot of noise. The one thing that they were saying was because they're so quiet and they can be operated remotely, they basically take them, they deliver them, and they can work and cut shaded fuel break or fire line around a development. And the people that are living in that community that need that shaded fuel break aren't listening to mechanized equipment day after day after day after day. Fascinating use of the technology, very quick to deploy. They're actually not that big. I would say it's about the size of a small sports car.
So I mentioned that Will Smith movie, and now I have to ask you, do you believe that robots or robotics could replace firefighters in the future?
Oh, well, let's see. I would say no. I would say no. Now, there are certainly aspects of the job where I think technology and robotics are going to be beneficial, but the most powerful computer in the world, the most powerful, thinking machine is the human brain. In the environment that we operate in is quite varied, and it's subject to change very, very quickly as conditions change. Now, can somebody argue this? Probably. Am I right? Probably not. Will robots probably replace a lot of other stuff? Yeah, probably. My sense tells me though that for the foreseeable future, it augments the human intervention, the human thought process, whether that's our tactics and strategy, employing technology to accomplish a task more safely, more quickly, more efficiently, more cost effectively, all of those things. As a straight replacement, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. Automated systems though really do offer a significant advantage, when it comes to firefighting. I mean, obviously we have automatic systems in buildings, in structures. We're already starting to see, entrepreneurs trying to create similar things for other environments. The wildland environment is one that is very, very interesting as well. So we definitely see technology trying to push that way. Be curious to see how it plays out though.
Well, who knows, honestly, with the way that technology, some people are into it, some people are not. Some departments catch on a little slower due to financial restraints and whatnot. But just like we always say, the role of a firefighter is so vast. I don't believe that a robot can cover everything that a firefighter can, because even though the name is firefighting, obviously we all know that's not all they do. They do a lot more medical stuff, and that's a whole different, you know, conversation on like medical robotics.
And that's an excellent segue, Samantha, because when you think about the incorporation of technology, you have to include artificial intelligence and you have to include robotics and you have to include all of those things. You know, for me to sit here and go, yeah, well, I don't think they'll ever replace firefighters. Like, yeah, well, when was the last time you saw surgery being performed and how surgery is actually performed on human beings? Somebody could have said the exact same thing about surgeons. What we are capable of as human beings and the technology that we're capable of creating it never ceases to amaze me. So I would say amazing things are coming. And I tell you, it's really important. I mean, you and I have a lot of common friends and a lot of common friends in fire service leadership. And one of the things I admire most about some of these folks is just their ability to think outside the box and go, why can't we? Whether that's, Jeff Johnson or Kate Dargan or Brian Fennessy or Jeff Meston. They are like, why can't we? And they just go right to it. And you're like, well, you know what? Maybe we can. I don't know. The fire service is full of naysayers, and I probably would wind up in that category on some of these things. But the big thinkers and the people that are willing to challenge the status quo and really push to continue to evolve this industry, so that we're more effective, more efficient, our communities are safer. Really, our hats are off to them because it's easy to say no. It's easy to say we're never going to get there. It takes a lot of courage to say maybe we should at least try it first.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing is for sure, is that robotics cannot replace these big brains, these big thinkers, you know? So, is there anything else that you would like to add on this topic today, or a message you'd like to share with the fire chiefs or fire service members listening?
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit before, and I'll go back to the experience that I had in previous organizations that I worked for, specifically as it relates to drones and technology. And it's not just drones, but technology in general. A lot of the folks that are listening, they'll know who Intera is, and they'll understand what Intera has done and how they've changed the landscape of the fire service. They understand that, they've seen what drones are doing and all this other kind of stuff. And what I would encourage is to be creative and ask questions and be less prone to say no, or less prone to wanting to push back on something that we don't understand or isn't just because it isn't the way that we've always done it. I remember the conversations that I had with young firefighters about bringing Intera on, or about a drone program, or about incorporating technology. And believe me, some of the most brilliant ideas that have changed the landscape of how we do business comes from our personnel, just not the fire chief's office, comes from our personnel saying, hey, how come we can't try this? Maybe we should think about this. So be open to it and listen to the conversation and engage your folks in these conversations, because you never know where it'll lead.
Yeah, the firehouse kitchen table talks, right?
All the best ideas, that's where they all come from.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Chief. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. A link to the article we discussed can be found in the show notes of this episode, as well as a link to subscribe to the Daily Dispatch. If you have a question for the panel, please reach out to us at fireheadlines@wfca.com and let us know what's on your mind. We'll see you back here next week for more Fire Headlines.